Security hearings aren't usually the place where everything unravels in real time, but this one did. It started the moment Senator Gary Peters locked onto Kristi Noem's answers and realized she wasn't just dodging questions, she was running from accountability. And in seconds the entire tone of the room shifted. What began as a routine oversight hearing turned into a full-blown dismantling of DHS's most confusing, most expensive, and most legally questionable decisions. Viewers watching the exchange could feel it, the tension, the cracks, the uncomfortable silence every time Peters asked a question Noem couldn't answer.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you again, Secretary Noem, for being here. I just want to follow up briefly with Chairman Paul's questions about the cost of the wall, the billions of dollars that are going to be put forward. We do have to have accurate numbers so that we could look at that for funding it. But I would hope you also take a look at all of the cost of a wall, because there are a lot of other secondary kinds of defenses you have to put forward. I was at the wall. I've been with security folks. They tell me that a lot of the cartels have designed very sophisticated technologies to get over the wall. They're called ladders and they're called ropes. So a wall doesn't really do the job if there's not a lot of other background technologies there. So you just can't put out a cost for the wall. That's money that's not going to be as effective without everything else. So let's have a discussion about that. For the first time in U.S. history, the federal government, at the direction of President Trump, is moving immigrants apprehended and detained in the United States on civil immigration charges to Naval Station at Guantanamo Bay, which I know you're very familiar with. In March, I traveled to Guantanamo Bay with several colleagues to have a firsthand examination of the detention operations underway. And I certainly have serious concerns about the cost involved there. To date, can you tell us the total cost for detaining individuals at Guantanamo Bay?
You want the cost per individual?
Do you have that?
I do not have that with me today, sir. I can get that for you.
Well, I do have a number. Do you know how much it costs to hold an immigrant in ICE detention facility in the United States? Do you have that number?
Now, are you talking per day? 100 and I believe the last estimate that I got was $142 a day, around in that approximately, per day?
Yeah, but it's close to what I'm understanding. I understand it's $165 per day, so it's in the range. I'm still waiting for detailed financial information from this administration from my time to Guantanamo Bay. In fact, a letter with Ranking Member, or Chairman Paul and the Ranking Member together, we wanted more information on the costs there. When I was there, the 2-month cost estimate for operations was $43 million when we were down there talking to the officials there. And that does not include transportation to and from the island. We find that people are sent to the island and then they're sent back to the United States again before they're sent out. I'm not sure why we have all those costs. We have plenty of ICE facilities to keep them here. Why you have to send them there and back. And on the day that I visited, there were 87 people in custody. And my understanding is that's a pretty normal number. There's at that time, at least. So my back of the napkin calculation, we're waiting for your numbers, is that it's costing about $100,000 a day to keep someone at Guantanamo Bay. Man, this is like ripe for Doge. Why is Doge not down there? We're spending $100,000 a day to keep someone at Guantanamo, and we fly them down there, we keep them there a while, then we fly them back to the United States. Or we could keep them here for $165 a day. I think that's kind of outrageous. So, I'm concerned by the staggering cost of this, and I would hope, Secretary, you could commit providing this committee a detailed breakdown of the total cost of that operation there. There were just a sea of empty beds. There was all sorts of security folks and nobody in those beds, which is why it's so expensive. So Chairman Paul will probably use this on his Festivus report later, I'm sure, of outrageous government spending, and I'll look forward to seeing that. Secretary Noem, are you familiar with Section 872 of the Homeland Security Act of 2002?
It sounds familiar, sir. You'll have to remind me the topic, yes.
Well, Section 872 requires you, as Secretary, to provide a 60-day notice to Congress of any creation, deletion, consolidation, or alteration of organizations within the department that are not required in statute, which must include an explanation for the rationale behind any charges. It also prohibits you from making any changes to offices in the status. So my question for you is, why have you not provided notice to Congress of the changes you are making at the department? And will you be doing so in the near future? And will you include intended reduction in forces in that? For example, you've already terminated virtually the whole Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Office staff without any communication to Congress about your intent. And the only letter yesterday claiming all of the statutory responsibilities would be met, you sent a letter, but it conflicts certainly with the whistleblower disclosure that I received last week. So please explain to the committee why you are not following this law.
Well, Senator, we are following that law. Those offices that you referenced are still open and functioning and providing their duties as required, but they have been right-sized. Many times the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, or the Ombudsman Office, which you and I visited about before, had grown quite expansive. They were used as a political tool, suing and attacking each other and censoring individuals and not doing the job for which they were created. So we've right-sized them, put them back on mission, and if there would be an instance to where notification is required, I certainly will follow that.
Time has expired. Senator Moreno.
Thank you again.
What he exposed wasn't just bad math or vague talking points. It was a pattern of decisions so costly, so unprecedented, and so far outside the bounds of what Congress had authorized that even seasoned lawmakers were left staring in disbelief. And what happened next would leave even more people stunned. Peters didn't waste time. He opened with a question that cut straight through the noise and hit the very foundation of Noem's argument. Why, if DHS was requesting billions for a new border wall, were basic numbers missing? Why were the most essential cost estimates nowhere to be found? Noem repeated the familiar lines, the kind of broad statements meant to sound confident but reveal nothing. But Peters wasn't interested in political sound bites. He wanted receipts, actual numbers, actual breakdowns of where every dollar was supposed to go. And when he pressed her, the facade started to slide. Because here's the truth, DHS wasn't offering a real cost analysis. They were offering a wish list, one that ballooned to tens of billions of dollars with no explanation. But Peters went further. He didn't just challenge the cost, he broke it down in a way that exposed how incomplete the entire proposal really was. A wall, he said, is just one piece of border security. Without additional technology, sensors, surveillance systems, rapid response support, the wall isn't a barrier. It becomes an obstacle that can be defeated with something as simple as a ladder or a rope. That wasn't speculation. It was testimony from security officials themselves. So when Noem tried to frame the wall as a standalone solution worth billions, Peters calmly reminded her that even the agents on the ground weren't convinced. And just like that, the veneer of certainty cracked. Yet that wasn't the moment the room really froze. That came when Peters shifted the questioning to something far more shocking, something DHS clearly thought would stay out of the spotlight. For the first time in American history, the government was sending immigrants detained on civil immigration charges, not crimes, not national security threats, but civil violations, to Guantanamo Bay. Think about that. Guantanamo, one of the most controversial detention facilities in the world. A place never designed for processing typical immigration cases, and Peters, who had just visited the island weeks before, wasn't about to let that detail slide past the public. He described what he saw: 87 people held there, surrounded by rows of empty beds and a massive, expensive security infrastructure operating at near vacuum levels, hundreds of staff, layers of logistics, transportation costs, maintenance, specialized oversight. And for what? To detain fewer than 100 people who could have been processed in standard ICE facilities on U.S. soil. Noem tried to offer generalities, broad phrases about security and operations, but Peters wasn't looking for generalities. He asked her directly if she knew the cost of keeping someone at Guantanamo. She didn't. He asked for comparisons to ICE facilities. She didn't have those either. So Peters pulled out the numbers himself. In the United States, he said, it costs about $165 per day to detain someone in a typical ICE center, but at Guantanamo, based on the official data and what he witnessed, the cost per detainee skyrocketed to nearly $100,000 a day. That wasn't a typo, not a misread, not an exaggeration. $100,000 a day per person. It was an expense so staggering, so wildly disproportionate, that Peters half-jokingly pointed out that even the most scrutinized government programs would never burn through money like that. The cost wasn't just inefficient, it was indefensible. And the deeper implication hung heavy in the room. Why was DHS deliberately choosing the most expensive, least practical, least transparent option available when perfectly capable facilities already existed in the U.S.? Why was this decision made in near secrecy? Why were lawmakers only discovering the truth after physically visiting the island themselves? Noem didn't answer, because she couldn't. Every response circled back to vague language about operations and adjustments, but not a single concrete detail could explain the absurd financial choices unfolding under her leadership. But Peters wasn't finished. Because financial waste was alarming, but legal violations were even more serious. And Peters had one more question, a question that hit at the very heart of congressional oversight. He brought up Section 872 of the Homeland Security Act, a law that requires DHS to notify Congress 60 days before making significant internal changes. Not a suggestion, not a guideline, a legal requirement. Yet under Noem, major offices inside DHS had been reduced, reorganized, or effectively dismantled without any notification to Congress. That included the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Office, one of the few internal mechanisms designed to check abuses of power. When Peters asked why no notice was given, Noem insisted that the offices were still open and functioning, just right-sized. But Peters had whistleblower documents indicating otherwise, and he made sure she knew it. And here's where the tension peaked. Because everyone in that room understood what it meant when an oversight office suddenly goes quiet. It doesn't mean efficiency. It means control. It means fewer eyes on internal decisions. It means fewer obstacles for policies that might never withstand public scrutiny. Peters didn't accuse her outright of dismantling oversight. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Employees gone, responsibilities unclear, legal notifications ignored, and when he pressed her again for concrete explanations, she offered none. It was a moment where the contrast between authority and accountability couldn't be sharper. Noem had the authority. Peters was demanding the accountability, and only one of them came prepared. What really shook the hearing wasn't just that Noem had no answers. It was that she didn't even seem to have the information necessary to defend the decisions her department was making. Every time Peters asked for details, she deferred. Every time he referenced the law, she sidestepped. Every time he presented evidence contradicting her statements, she insisted vaguely that everything was being done correctly. It wasn't just evasive, it was alarming, because it suggested that DHS was operating without transparency, not by accident but by design. And Peters made sure that point landed. He reminded her and everyone watching that oversight is not optional. Congress is not a spectator. When federal agencies restructure, Congress must be informed. When billions in taxpayer dollars disappear into questionable projects, Congress must get answers. And when operations take place in facilities as historically sensitive as Guantanamo Bay, transparency isn't just expected, it's required. Peters wasn't simply critiquing policy, he was defending the balance of power that keeps the federal government accountable to the people it serves. The most revealing part of the hearing came not from what Peters exposed but from what Noem couldn't explain. She couldn't justify the missing numbers. She couldn't justify the outrageous Guantanamo costs. She couldn't justify the lack of congressional notification, and she couldn't justify why whistleblower accounts directly contradicted her assurances. What viewers witnessed wasn't just a senator asking tough questions. It was a system testing itself to see whether the people in power were willing to obey the laws that govern them. Peters ended not with theatrics, not with grandstanding, but with a reminder that echoed far deeper than the room itself. He warned that the rule of law matters, that transparency matters, that Congress will not allow DHS to operate in the shadows or sidestep legal obligations. It was a message not just to Noem, but to every federal leader watching. Accountability is not something you can outrun. It will catch up, whether in hearings like this or in investigations that follow. And for anyone paying attention, the warning was unmistakable. This wasn't a partisan clash. This wasn't political theater. This was a senator telling the head of DHS that her department was not above the law, and that the era of unanswered questions was coming to an end. The hearing exposed more than numbers and decisions. It exposed a leadership structure operating without oversight, spending without justification, and shifting internal power without authorization. And that's why this moment matters. because if agencies can ignore Congress, they can ignore the public. And if they can ignore the public, accountability collapses. That's why hearings like this aren't just procedural, they are essential. They show us who is telling the truth, who is hiding the details, and who is willing to stand up not for politics, but for transparency. Senator Gary Peters didn't walk into the hearing looking for a fight. He walked in looking for answers, and by the time he was finished it was clear who had them and who didn't. If you want deeper breakdowns of these hearings, and if you want the truth behind the polished statements and pre-written talking points, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and hit the notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because every hearing reveals something new, and the more we shine light on these moments, the harder it becomes for anyone to hide what's really happening behind the scenes.